Hi and welcome to the 11th episode of Wales.Pol. Today I am joined by Shavanah Taj. Thanks for joining us, Shavanah.
Thank you, Harriet.
I think lots of people my age and lots of people that I know who would consider themselves kind of like leftists or socially liberal have fantastic politics when it comes to elections and movements. But in terms of their representation and their rights in the workplace, not a lot of them are actually involved in trade unions. So I'm wondering if you could explain to them, for those who don't know, like what the basic function of a trade union is.
Okay, so the basic function of a trade union is very, very simple actually, because when you are in work, when you have a problem in work, there is only one place for you to go to if there is no union, and that's HR. HR are paid by the employer. But, as is the case for most things in life, you do need to have independent advice and to know that somebody else can come and advocate and mediate and negotiate on your behalf, but not just on your behalf, but it's a structure that allows the average worker to take power away from the employer solely, which is where it lies if there is no unions, and to protect you as a worker.
I really like that bit you mentioned around building power, because I imagine lots of people my age, when they leave university and go into the workforce, it's just standard. So then getting involved in a trade union offers people a different avenue, doesn't it, to try and like express themselves at work and like you said, build power with their colleagues. And the idea of like finding a recognition agreement or building a recognition agreement, how would you suggest that someone would go about that?
So I would say to people, if you can get an employer to voluntarily recognise your union, that is probably the nicest and easiest option. But it all depends on which industry you're talking about. Because if you work in the public sector in Wales, for example, you're encouraged, through the First Minister onwards, to join a union, right? But ultimately, if you are working in Amazon, for example, it's going to be a lot harder, right? There's been that story recently, for example, in Sports Direct, where, there was a woman that gave birth in the toilets and she came back to do her job, having given birth, literally, not so long ago. And that just shows you the level of exploitation that's out there. Now, if an employer doesn't want to recognise you, you've then got to build from the beginning.
I'm wondering, what are some of the wins that we could share with people to try and explain what the union could or couldn't do?
Yeah. So you can look at lots of, there's loads of different examples, and, many people refer back to previous struggles, particularly in Wales. We've got a rich history as far as, industrial disputes and campaigns are concerned. But one of the ones that was quite interesting a couple of years ago now, we had a dispute at the National Museum of Wales. The employer had, they thought, well, where can we possibly make some cuts, right? And as is often the case, they decided that they were going to go after the lowest paid. And the lowest paid, basically, the dispute was over weekend working, right? So if you worked a weekend, you got additional pay, etc., etc. But ultimately, this was about the workers, right? And it goes back down to worker power, and it goes back down to strategic organising, campaigning, and it's got to be very, very organic, and people have got to feel ownership. The way they self-organised, they were organising through WhatsApp groups. They were meeting in a coffee shop and stuff on a weekly basis. But what they also knew was that the union was there for them. We did win the dispute. I'm really glad to say we won the dispute. In fact, we ended up with a lot more than we thought that we were going to end up with. And what was great about it is that we are now in a position with the employer where they value the union's opinion.
I'm wondering whether you can explain the new government legislation, the Social Partnership Act, and is it the Fair Work the Fair Work Commission?
Yeah. So the purpose of the Social Partnership Act is going to be, one, that we find ways and means of legislating to protect workers' rights, but also that any employer that is currently in receipt of any government grant must recognise unions.
That's massive.
Right? So that's huge, right? So that means that unions have got to get access to the workers to be able to unionise and organise that workforce. That's going to be really interesting because it gives the automatic right to trade unions to grow in sectors that we may have not traditionally been able to cut through to, or in sectors where it's a lot more difficult to get into to actually unionise in the first place. So we will no longer have to unionise from the back door. We get to come through the front door. And also that, you know, when it comes to employers who are procuring work, you know, contracting services out, etc., that there's an ethical process for how they procure that work, and to make sure that people get paid as a minimum the living wage, you know, and their health and safety is protected. So all of those things basically come into play. This is going to mean that it's going to be in legislation, which means regardless of what change of government, it's going to be harder to change things because it's going to be embedded in law.
Just to finish this really beautifully, if you could inspire someone to join a trade union, what would be the things that you would say to them to encourage them to get involved, not just in a union, but in the movement?
But what I always say to people is, if you're tired of being treated and in a certain way, being mistreated, you know, being pushed from pillar to post, and you're really frustrated, that means something is wrong, right? But join a union because actually it is the only opportunity that you will ever get of tipping the balance, right? And it's about leveling up. That is what it's about. It is about having control and say collectively and being part of something that's much bigger than you, and knowing that when you fall, that there is somebody that will catch you and protect you and look after you, and you can do the same thing in return for them.
Oh, that's really lovely. This has been really fun, Shavanah.